Thank you to the Yukon team, and thank you for puppy picture. Always appreciated, right? So, um, let's get into the Q&A. And looks like we should have time to get to most of these. So if there's a question you haven't asked yet, please go ahead and add it to the Q&A and we can get it asked. So first for the University of Michigan team, and this was came in as a comment, but I saw some things in the chat that were kind of echoing this. So essentially, I'll try to synthesize this a little bit more. But seeing that you're using like universal design for learning principles as you created your courses and kind of um, thinking about safety, appropriate safety and design, how do you incorporate that as you're working through and designing that course? And how do you think about that? Even thinking about, like, I know Letitia mentioned at one point, the room setup. So if you guys would just talk a little bit about that.
So we actually spend quite a bit of time thinking about it as a group, and we just try to think about, especially for accessibility, making sure that people their needs are being met. We ask the question to them, do they have any accessibility requests and things like that. So we try to be pretty thorough and making sure that everyone's needs are met, everyone's dietary restrictions and things like that are met beforehand.
And we also make sure we reflect after each cohort on how the experience went. So we're trying to keep an eye on the vibe of the room. Does it seem like those less experienced participants aren't engaging as much? And what can we do to help shift that for the next cohort?
That's great. Thank you. Um, for the Yukon team, question, do you think there needs to be a Prisma extension for data reporting?
Probably not a bad idea.
Okay.
I don't know what their workflow looks like for adding more extensions, but I'd be in
Uh,
support.
okay. And another question while we're there, and this is more of I think a technical but maybe just to speak to this too. Discuss the disadvantages of using spaces in file names.
So yeah, like you say, it does mostly have to do with command lines. If you're doing a lot of coding for your data analysis, like using Python or R, it's just easier if we consistently do or do not use spaces. Same thing with capitalization. If you're consistent with the capitalization, it just makes running the code a lot easier. So while it's not necessarily critical in evidence synthesis or like in file naming where you're mostly doing human reading, anytime that you're going to be automating using some kind of computer system, it's just easier if we standardize this across all of our files.
Yeah, great. Thank you. For the Michigan team, does your workshop have a policy or written expectation about AI usage in coursework?
We discussed whether we should and decided against it since these are adult learners. And if they're intending to use AI in their workflows, that's more about their workplace's policies. And then we do have an AI and evidence synthesis session that we've added to the workshop where we discuss like the RAISE guidelines, the recommend responsible use of AI in evidence synthesis. So we're making sure we're covering those principles before we send them out to do evidence synthesis work.
Okay, and another question for you all. What is the biggest pain point related to working effectively with a review team? Not technical challenges, but related to soft skills that you're hearing
Uh,
about or teaching about.
I think, and we've kind of responded to this because we always add, new content, change our content in the workshop. But I think anything where you are kind of putting yourself out there, putting your expertise on the line, so kind of like negotiating your role, negotiating acknowledgement or co-authorship. Um, Saying no is a big one. So we just, I did the abbreviated session on Monday, like how to say no. That's always a really hard thing. It's kind of like once you have the skills, getting yourself in there to do the work, and then also once you have the confidence, being able to like assess whether or not you want to take on the project or if you need to withdraw from a project. I think those are probably the hardest, most challenging things. I don't know if the co-instructors have any other ideas.
Agreement there. Okay, perfect. Back to UConn. Question, is this a one-time class or is it part of a series of classes? I know that was part of Love Data Week, right? So maybe it's planned
Kind
to
of,
be, but
kind of both.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it started as part of Love Data Week. We had other sessions with our scholarly communications librarian. Megan, I don't remember who else. We had a whole week of stuff.
Yeah, I had a data heavy one, and then our Scholar Communications did like a research metrics, and Marissa did this one. And these are all part of our Data Bites series, which is a series that we hold throughout the year and we record, but it's not necessarily part of like a specific sub-series. We are in the process of discussing what our instruction is going to look like for the upcoming year and if this is going to be a repeat session as part of our Data Bytes series or as part of our systematic review series.
Yeah, I do another session on kind of with our instruction librarian on all about reviews that kind of covers the basics of a systematic review and then goes into the different types and then libraries our service model for it, for our support for it. But yeah, we'll probably be teaching it again. We like
Okay.
to reuse things that are already done.
Yeah, makes it easier for sure, right? Another question for you guys. How often and how much does do your research team share in data management practices? Do you try to harmonize with them on naming conventions or other aspects?
So, data services are relatively new to Yukon Health. I am the inaugural data librarian, and I have been here for not quite 2 years yet. So we were still in the process of building up all of our services. Right now, when it comes to things like file naming and organization, it's mostly been education focused of trying to put out the webinars, or when I am invited to speak, I try to bring this up as an important part of data management. But we don't have established relationships with research teams yet, as this is still a new service.
I'd say on the systematic review side, I try to model, good file naming and structure and explain why, here's your set of, we do collect PDFs for folks. Here's the set of PDFs and here's how I did the file naming, or when, there's back and forth on the manuscript, I'm trying to model, the date and my initials for when I edited, and they usually follow suit. I don't get too many revised from my teams. But yeah, it's like Megan said, we're still working on it.
All right, great. And back to the folks from New Michigan. A little bit of a longer question. I'll read it out though. When you do the protocol appraisal activity, how do you ensure the discussion stays civil? We've refrained from using worst practice examples in our workshops because we don't want it to look like we're shaming researchers. So have you encountered any issues with that?
I guess I can respond. So I guess I actually logged into our Canvas site just to kind of scroll through the discussion to see like what the general vibe was, and of the many years we've done this type of activity, I think number one, we don't pick something that's like the worst case. It's really just a random protocol. And I think the way we ask the question, because we give them some discussion prompts, and it's very much like, is the question reasonable in scope? Is the search prompt reasonable? So, really just comparing it against the Prisma P protocol checklist, like what's missing, what more information would you need from this team, and able to. So, I think the way we frame the prompts for them to kind of dig in and investigate the protocol have kept it like, at least in the last cohort, I don't really see anybody being very snarky. It's like, I have concerns or questions about this and this and this, or maybe I would need more information in order to, answer this part of it. But it hasn't, we don't frame it as this is the worst case. It's more like this is just a random protocol. And I think we talk about the psychological safety, and we're all just learners here. And I think thinking about our researchers, they're also learning. And so I think there's just kind of a general culture of like, let's all just learn together and do better. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that's kind of how it feels to me.
And similarly, for the discussion scenarios, we make sure our framing isn't making generalizations. All researchers are going to do this, or some sort of us versus them mentality. And that really helps keep it in a more positive direction.
And then one final question for you folks. Are you on any ES roadshows in the future? And maybe if someone wants more information about how to schedule
Yeah,
those, we
they
can
can
drop
reach
some
out to
information in the
us.
chat. Okay, got it.
Yeah, just reach out directly and
Okay.
we can work on logistics if that is something that's feasible on both sides.
Okay, and we've got a couple minutes, even though my timer is down, we still have a couple minutes left. So one last question for Yukon. Do you see the difference between secondary and primary data management? And do you have a separate strategy for qualitative versus quantitative?
So, Marissa, I'll want you to jump in on the evidence synthesis side of it, but most data practices are project or data type agnostic. Our general best practices kind of apply across the board. That said, there are differences when it comes to some of the nuances or the analysis side of it. But if we're thinking of just all data sets as just being data sets regardless of the file type or the data type that's going into it, we're going to be managing them kind of consistently throughout the entire project. Where we're seeing differences in the data types might be in the way that you're doing the data extraction, in which case that kind of gets into if you're using a form to kind of pull that information, how you're structuring the form, what kind of answers you're looking for, and then what you're doing with the analysis side of it. But as far as like the actual management part, we're going to be consistent in what the best practices say.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about this question a little bit. I think it depends on, there's probably differences for qualitative versus quantitative. It's going to depend on what you're extracting out of your data. I don't think I have a very good answer for this. I think Megan handled it really well. But there was a Zenodo form that went out with like a data management plan in the chat that I think Kate shared that I think would help with some of this planning for what your strategy would be for qualitative versus quantitative. And again, I would look back to, what you're pulling out of versus in a scoping review versus, a full meta-analysis. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And there is a place to put resources too, not just in the chat where we've got a document we're collecting, and I'm sure you'll see the link posted at some point in the chat as it goes by. That wraps it up for this session. We've got about 5 minutes of a little bit of a break, which gives you time to maybe get over to the session 3B in the lobby, and we'll see you over there. So thank you all so much.